I'm Letícia Marinho. I am a Brazilian doctoral researcher at Fiocruz, that is the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, that is one of the most prominent health institutions here in Latin America. And along with Jessica Norberto, who is my advisor, I'm going to talk about today about accessibility and inclusion of visitors with disabilities through visitor studies papers from the Visitor Studies Journal. Okay, I'm going to start this presentation by describing myself. I am a white woman with fair skin. I have long brown wavy hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing square glasses, prescription glasses, and red, like a red blouse. All of my slides have white background, black text, and sometimes I included some decorative elements. So I'm going to describe them as we go. Okay. Please, if you have any comments, questions, leave them in the chat because I can see it there, so we can chat a little bit during the talk if you like. I'm going to start this section by saying that this investigation is within the scope of our research group, that is the Accessible Science Museums and Centers, or MCCAC, as we call it in Portuguese. We collaborate in research about accessibility, visitors with disabilities, their experiences, and also we develop tools and methodological frameworks to better understand accessibility in museums, science centers. We include their zoos, libraries, and planetariums, and so on. In 2023, we were granted the Simuset Award for a project that is called Science Communication, Access, Accessibility, and Experiences of Diverse Audiences. And I invite you all to meet a little bit about us and what we have been doing here in Brazil in this field that is ever growing here through the QR code on the left side of the screen, and also on our website that is on the QR code on the right side of the screen, or through the website grupomccac.org. So moving forward, uh, Jessica, can you please pass to the next? I don't know if you can see the. Okay. Um, let's start by quoting Maria Zeda, who is a disability access consultant, who is also a woman with disability herself. She says, museums can be so enriching for anyone's lives, and I dare say even more so for disabled people, who experience exclusion and discrimination in many areas of life, and perhaps can find refuge, consolation, and inspiration in a museum that helps them grow, learn, and feel the magic of being human. In the face of this affirmation, which I 100% agree, and even though it's from 2013, it's still very current, and I think it will be current forever, I have to question so that we can debate here. Where do we stand with accessibility in museums? Are museums accessible? Are they inclusive? Where are people with disabilities in the museums? So, to the next. I think we can pinpoint this discussion by asking a more simple question, that is, what is accessibility? In the left side of the slide, we have the universal accessibility symbol, which is a new symbol, and it's like a stylized human figure with open arms and legs that is connected with blue dots in a circle, and just to represent this discussion. And the Article 9 of the UN Convention of the on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities describe accessibility as the possibility to enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully in all aspects of life. So all state parties who signed this UN convention, Brazil is one of them, shall take appropriate measures to ensure that persons with disabilities access on equal basis with others to the physical environment, to transportation, and I'm going to highlight here to information and communication, including information and communication technologies and systems. So, for with disabilities, for people with disabilities to be able to access freely and fully every aspect of life. Okay, so we can highlight the information and communication aspects. So we can talk about museums, which are one of the most important settings for education, information, and communication about science, art, and culture in many countries. We have a lot of different types of museums, but they usually cover these aspects, and they play a huge part on building a cultural basis on any place. Okay, we understand that disability is an evolving concept, and today we have the knowledge that disability results from the interaction between persons with disabilities and barriers in the environment. So, what make people with disabilities to experience barriers is the environment that is not prepared to welcome them. It's the environment who don't think about them when they're going to be built, to be developed. So, since accessibility involves information and communication, we need to place museums in this scenario. Okay. So, we already answered what is accessibility, and we can now answer what is a museum. The latest museum definition by the International Council of Museums, that is from 2022, says that a museum is a not-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage. And I highlight here, open to the public, accessible and inclusive, museums foster diversity and sustainability. So it's basically a condition so for a museum to foster diversity and sustainability that they are accessible and inclusive. So but can we say that all museums are accessible and open to the public? All museums foster diversity and sustainability. I know that this answer is kind of simple because we know that it's not true for every institution. So all institutions are different, and they all have their particularities, and especially when we consider different locations. So when we consider different countries, we have very different realities when it comes to accessibility in these institutions. But some accessibility barriers can often be very present in almost every museum due to the nature of these spaces. So we can mention physical barriers, communicational, attitudinal, that refer to the efforts that are being made by the institution to include and to welcome people with disabilities, and also emotional barriers. It was very nice that Wilson mentioned that it's not enough like for a zoo to hand out free tickets for a specific group to be present there, because there are a lot of aspects that keep them away from experiencing these places. And this is very true for museums and people with disabilities. It's not enough that they are free, it's not even enough that they offer some accessibility resources, because not everyone will be able to access and to feel like they belong there because of the historical exclusion of this group from these spaces. So it was very nice to hear about it in other contexts and with other communities, because this apply very harshly also to this context that I'm presenting here. So, even if a person with disability can enter the physical space of the museum, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be welcomed, they are going to fully enjoy and learn with their experience there. So this brings us to the current scenario, where we have a lack of specific data on visitors with disability also. So how many are there? Where are they from? What are their needs and wants? Most museums don't have that information on their own visitors, and they usually are responsible for their own visitor data, And I think the Wilson's work is an example of that. But a lot of museums don't have visitor profile research, so they don't know their visitors, and they don't know if there are any persons with disability visiting, and what do they need and what do they want. And also, it brings us to narrow accessibility research approaches, which I'm going to further elaborate now. When we talk about visitor research and accessibility research in museums, we often find that research is focused more on physical accessibility. So, assessing the physical accessibility of the museum space. If there are any elevators, ramps, like, I don't know how to say it in English, but like, Jessica Corrimão, I forgot the name. Uh, if you can,
Handrails.
okay, handrails, and 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 so on. If the museum can be navigated by persons with physical disabilities, and research is very often focused on that. And we often find that few research employ a participatory framework. So many researches on accessibility in museums don't involve visitors with disabilities. They are not involved as consultants, as participants, as visitors in observations research, and it's complicated to talk about accessibility without people with disabilities. Even we have their motto that is nothing about us without us. So we have to try to maintain that in mind when we have to build our research design and to really deepen our understanding about accessibility. And museums may have accessibility actions, but they often do not invest on visitor research, as I mentioned earlier. And this is very common. And some museums, like we have example of museums here in Rio, that is where I'm from, that they have a lot of educational efforts to accessibility and to different groups of people with disabilities, but they don't have the profile of the visitors. They don't conduct continuous visitor researches. So these actions are being held, but they are not mapped and they are not shared with other museums, which is something that is complicated to our area also. And we get to the last topic that I'm going to mention, that we have limited investigation on visitor studies focused on people with disabilities. So visitor experience, visitor profile, we have very little research compared to the bigger picture that specifically focus on people with disability, especially considering their experiences. That is what I'm trying to do with my doctorate research and what I did in my master's. And we have very little references up to this date about it. So I found a very interesting research that was a bibliometric analysis of museum visitor experiences, research that the authors could review more than 400 articles that were indexed by Scopus from 1986 to 2023. So what did they found? They found a very similar picture to, I think, almost every area of research, that they had a predominance of Western countries, like by far. US and the UK were the most publishers of articles, and it's a scenario that we find in almost every research topic. And this also they also mentioned that in Scopus they found the articles that were written in English. So, for example, every article that was written in Spanish, in Portuguese, and other languages, they are not found there, and they could not be assessed. So it's something that we really need to try to, as Latin Americans, I'm saying about like me and Jessica and other Latin American fellows, we have to look a little bit more closely to our locations and to the research that is being held here, because often this research gets really niche and located here, and it's not being shared with the rest of the world. And they found that the accessibility term is often related to tourism experience. So it's not necessarily that accessibility, when it appears in the articles, is talking about people with disabilities. They often use this term, and I also found this in my master's when I was investigating online museums accessibility, that this term is often used to describe the access to tourist settings and sightseeing and everything. So we have to separate the use of this word, because it doesn't mean that when someone mentions accessibility, it's about people with disabilities. And this term, this thing, emerged mostly after 2019. So it's a very recent discussion regarding volume of research. And the Visitor Studies Journal is the fourth journal with the most published articles, with 14 out of the 407. So, since we are here in the Visitor Studies Conference, and it's one of the most important journals that focus specifically on visitor research, we kind of had to ask ourselves how the Visitor Studies Journal addresses accessibility and visitors with disability. So I'm going to further delve into this area by specifically focusing on the Visitor Studies Journal. That is one of my main sources of references for my research, because of the topic. So we did a search through the journal's volumes that totaled 17 volumes with 2 issues each, from 2007 to 2024. And we have a total number of 250 articles and other documents, I think. And we search for accessibility, inclusion, equity, and the experience of visitors with disabilities in the title, abstract, and keywords. Out of the 250 articles, we pre-selected 5 of them that appeared at least one of these topics on title, abstract, and keywords. 2 of them were excluded because they didn't relate to visitors with disabilities. They often mention equity and inclusion, but in more broad experiences. So we excluded these 2 articles, and we ended with a final selection of 3 after the in-depth reading of all 5. So we characterize them with the main theme, methodology design, visitor engagement, if there was or wasn't, and study outcomes. So these were the 3 articles that we found. One from 2007, one from 2020, and one from 2023. Even though our total number of articles analyzed were smaller compared to the bibliometric analysis that I showed you, they both of them are from the US and the UK. They're from Great Britain. So it maintained this trend in the area. And the first one is called Implications of the Social Model of Disability for Visitor Research. This is one of the first articles that I used on my master's degree, because it advocates for a more critical approach on visitor research, and it's a more theoretical discussion, but it's very important, and it was really helpful for me to understand the area. And the second one, designing 3D prints for blind and partially sighted audiences in museums. exploring the needs of these living with sight loss. And the third one, identifying barriers to accessibility for museum visitors who are blind and visually impaired. So we have similar topics of the last two two articles. Okay. So regarding the main theme, methodology, visitor engagement, participation, and outcomes, the first one brings this critical approach of museum research and advocates for the social model of disability that relates to the idea that disability is a result of the contact with barriers from the environment. And it brings the methodology is brought by a theoretical framework and a case study. And visitor engagement participation is not like directly on the research, but it was involved within the project that was presented on the case study. So the outcomes that the study brings us is that emancipatory research frameworks may help visitors with disability to gain new insights. So their direct participation in the research can help them expand their horizons on their own lives, their culture, and their educational experiences. And also, museums should shift from accessibility provision to impact assessment. So, not just providing accessibility, but understanding the impact of these actions. The second one, uh, talks about access barriers for visitors with visual disabilities, and they use 3D replicas to their experience to better their experience. So the methodology is very similar on the last two. They conducted semi-structured interviews and observation visits and content analysis. And the visitors had disabilities and they participated directly on the research. The outcomes of the second study are the visitors preferred multi-sensory interpretations. So they didn't like to use only tactile feeling, but they also explored other sensory parts like the hearing, and the ones who had low vision, they also use a little bit of their visual sense and other feelings as well. And they said that additional resources such as audio description could help them to better their experience. And the third one, they had the main theme as physical and social barriers for visitors with disabilities. And they conducted a participatory action research that relates to the first article with the emancipatory research. And they conducted guided walks, so observatory visits, and semi-structured interviews. They also had their visitor participation, and they identified as key barriers the lack of multisensory info related to the outcome of the second study, inaccessible signage, and untrained staff that relates to attitudinal barriers. So, as solutions, they present assistive technology, staff training, and people with disabilities inclusion in decision making. So the three articles, even though we have a limited number, they relate a lot on the perspective, and I think they bring very positive perspectives because of the advocacy of people with disabilities in the participation of the research, and also bringing their perspective as what should be made, how can we improve our experience, as they said. So people with disabilities advocacy is present in all of them, and the strategies and barriers for visitors with visual disabilities and participatory research through visits and semi-structured interviews are present in the lesser two articles. So we found in other bibliographical researches, not only from visitor studies journal, that this is very common. These topics are very recurrent, especially with people with visual disabilities. And so, where can we expand to? What can we learn from these experiences brought by the Visitor Studies Journal? A key theme is the people with disabilities advocacy. So we have to involve visitors with disability during the methodological design and highlight them as contributors of the study. So they are not mere visitors or participants. They are contributing to our research, to our understanding of their needs and how can we improve their experience. And also participatory methods help build stronger sense of belonging. And about strategies and barriers for visitors with visual disabilities, we can expand research to emotional and attitudinal barriers and other disability groups. One of the things that we have been working on our research projects is to build methodological frameworks that help to assess attitudinal barriers or attitudinal accessibility and to map what are the institutional actions that are improving this relationship with their studies. And we also can explore emerging fields in museums and promote impact assessment studies. So, reaching our final considerations, we found that we have a limited number of articles on the theme published by the Visitor Studies Journal. Within 250, we only found like 5 that could relate a little bit, and 3 that directly related to visitors with disabilities. And also, since we have a limited number, we had low diversity of approaches. So we had one broad study and 2 on visual disabilities. That is very recurrent. And we see that there's an opportunity for the Visitor Study Journal to expand and cultivate thematic focus through targeted calls for submissions or specific research topics to further stimulate the researchers to delve more into this realm of visitor experience with people with disabilities. And we have much room to evolve on the debate on accessibility and people with disabilities in museums. And even though we are in 2025, we still have room to expand. And despite only considering the Visitor Studies Journal, so this isn't a broad review, uh, this brief uh, this brief investigation highlights some important study gaps within the field, and these are some study gaps that we are trying to work on, but we still have some methodological and um, framework challenges that we have to fix. So if you have any suggestions, questions, we would very gladly welcome them. So, well, I would like to thank you all for listening, for participating here in our session along with Wilson. And I would like to give a special thanks to the Visitor Study Association Committee for granting both me and my advisor Jessica the financial aid that covered our registration fees. So this allowed us to participate the conference. Our currency difference sometimes make it hard for us to engage in international conferences, but this allowed us to participate and engage with you all. And so I invite you once more to know our research group via the QR code that is on the center of the screen. And I leave you with my and Jessica emails. So if you have anything you want to check up on later, we welcome you. Thank you so much.